Welcome to the very first episode of the Infinite Energy Podcast. I am Danny Mueller, VP of Sales and Marketing at Frankensolar Americas, and with me is Alexander Wolf, Product Engineer at Frankensolar.
Great to be here.
Yeah, exciting to do this with you, Alex. The purpose of this podcast is going to be that Alex and I will be talking to industry experts from the solar industry. It'll be a variety of people from solar installers to manufacturers to engineers, policymakers, etc. So we're really excited about doing this. We've kind of been working on this for a long time, Alex, haven't we?
Indeed.
So since this is our first podcast, we quickly want to talk a little bit about Frankensolar and who we are here in the Canadian market and kind of where we came from. So, Alex, why don't you give us a little bit of a overview about Frankensolar?
Yeah, Frankensolar was a German distributor for solar components, very early in the German feed-in tariff market, founded in 1990, so a few decades in the industry. And Frankensolar, based in the Franken region, hence the name Frankensolar, located in Nuremberg.
Which is Bavaria.
Which is Bavaria. I myself, being German, I'm not from Bavaria and not from Nuremberg.
But you're close by.
But it's close, exactly. Probably 2 hours of a drive. But Frankensolar used to be, I think, the second or third largest distributor at the time. And with the German solar market being a little bit in a turmoil in the 2011-2012 timeframe, Frankensolar opened quite a few subsidiaries in other markets in the world, including, at that time, the Ontario market with the feed-in tariff that was introduced a couple of years earlier. And yeah, Frankensolar is here in Ontario and then in Canada since 2011. Very excited to be here in the Canadian market. And there are a few other subsidiaries that are still in operation, like in the Czech Republic, for example, and some other places. But yeah,
we did have a management buyout in, what was it, 2015, 2016?
2016, beginning of 2016, exactly.
We have a management buyout, so we're fully independent at this point.
Canadian owned now.
Canadian
exactly.
owned. Yeah. And we've really seen a lot of progress here over specifically the last 3 or 4 years. It's been pretty wild what's happened in the Canadian market, which used to be just an Ontario-based market until like 2015 or so.
Pretty much.
And then we saw big growth in, at first, Alberta, I think, was really big. In the meantime, Eastern Canada, Atlantic Canada has been really, really big as well. And then all across. I always say we're coast to coast to coast now. Pretty much in every province we're active. So yeah, that's kind of the Frankensolar part. And really what makes us a little bit different is that we take a lot of pride in helping solar installers pick the right products for their systems. Not necessarily what's best for us, but really what's best for the solar installer in the short and in the long term, helping them pick reliable products that make the systems more affordable to the end customer as well.
And design system the correct way. It's not only about the product, it's also about the entire design process, selection process of product that works for a specific application. A lot can be done wrong, I would almost say, if you don't pick something that works for your customer, for your specific territory or jurisdiction you're installing in, and for what your business typically installs and how you set up your business. A residential installer installing hundreds of small systems is a very, very different selection process than if you install larger commercial systems on rooftops or even ground mount systems on a very large scale. So knowing really what you want to do, who your customer is and your application, picking the right components is extremely important.
Yeah, and the thing is, what's the right product for solar installer A that focuses on residential may not be the right product for installer B that also does residential projects because their priorities may be different, right? The amount of systems,
different sales pitches,
exactly,
different focus on different features that the salespeople in that company bring to the customer and focus on, has a huge separation between, let's say, a microinverter concept, for example, versus a optimizer-based system versus a string inverter concept. So everyone has their own sweet spot how they want to tackle the market in their specific.
One more thing about Frankensolar right now, we have one warehouse that we own and operate here in Ontario. What's really going to be exciting is for us, we're planning to expand into the Western Canadian market. So we have a local warehouse there next year as well, which has been a long time coming, right, Alex?
It is.
We've been working on this tirelessly for the last year or so. Really, starting to get everything set up and
bringing product closer to Western or our Western Canadian customers. I think that's the big difference. We still ship free of charge for a lot of the shipments into the Western Canadian market.
Yeah.
But having a local warehouse and local inventory where we have just faster transition times is a huge advantage for our customers in the West.
I think the big one of the big difference of us versus some competitors is that we try to run pretty lean in order to be able to provide the best possible pricing to our customers, right? And that's why I don't think we ever planned to have 8 different warehouses across the country. Never say never, but I don't think it's what we do. We much rather spend that money providing free shipping, for example, to our customers, as well as just being able to provide really good pricing and a price list, and not having to, go in at a high price and hope that people are buying at a high price and then do price matching like some other companies do, which I think is really important for us.
Another point, to your point, Danny, managing inventory is extremely important. And for our customers, it's super important if you, for example, install a residential system, that you get your equipment for that specific residential job in one shipment, ideally from one warehouse.
Yeah.
If you have 6, 7, 8 warehouses all over the country, we see that in the industry, that some components are not in stock in a certain warehouse where the majority of your equipment is being shipped from. So you're now getting shipments from multiple warehouses at multiple times from different carriers, where you have to manage when they're coming, and they may not be coming in the order you want. So if whatever the roof attachments are not being shipped in the first shipments, and you get the inverter and maybe the panels first, then your crew is on site and doesn't have the equipment that they actually need to begin the installation process. So having that one location where you get your equipment from, and you get all your equipment in one shipment, is extremely important to optimize not only from a distribution perspective, efficiency and keeping the cost down, but also from an installer perspective to get their stuff and get the job done in one go without any second shipments or third shipments even.
Well, and the other thing that's happened in the past was, and we did this ourselves, is we had a Alberta warehouse at one point that was a third-party logistics warehouse, which some of our competitors still do. And the issue with that is just the quality control is not the same as when you operate.
If it's not your own staff, it's just on a different level. That works typically for larger components that are very easily packageable and can be shipped. But if it's a more complex pick from very small screw parts in a solar system to large panels and rails and all these things, third party was not the way to go, and it's just not the same quality level how the shipment is being picked and finally shipped to the customer.
I would like to take this conversation a little bit in a different direction now, Alex. We try to find out a little bit more about people, the people we work with. I think a lot of people in the solar industry know you already, but some don't. And over the years, as a good friend of mine, I've heard a lot of your stories. And I want to talk a little bit more about you. And we didn't grow up too far from each other. Me growing up in Switzerland, you growing up in Stuttgart, around Stuttgart area, in Swabia. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your background and where you came from?
Yeah, we looked it up. It's about 1 hour and 45 minutes from where I grew up to where Danny's from in Switzerland. So
well, I did that drive, funny enough,
true, yeah.
Last summer when I came to visit you for your German wedding celebration, where I got a ticket on my way there, because the Swiss are notorious for giving out
tickets.
car tickets. But yeah, so we went there and I got to meet your parents, who we've met before, but I got to see the house that you grew up in. And,
exactly, yeah.
I
grew up in a smaller town south of Stuttgart. The typical, 40,000 people, small town upbringing. Was always a little bit a tinkering guy. My dad built our own house at that point, besides his full-time job. So I was always part of the construction process, even as a younger guy. Was allowed to run around, play in the dirt piles, be on the excavator with my dad and all these things. So I always was a little bit hands-on and had my own tool set, and that carries on to this day, that I'm very fascinated about construction and tools and doing stuff with my hands. And I think that carried forward, looking into, okay, what are you doing after your high school? I looked into multiple things, from mechanical engineering to maybe some aerospace stuff. But I ended up with electrical engineering, because at that point I thought, you know what? I'll try it. It's a hard subject to get into, but if you never try, you never know if you would have, or could have done it. And it was pretty much spot on for me and what I like doing. And I did my pre-diploma, which is pretty much a bachelor's degree equivalent here in North America, at the University of Stuttgart with electrical engineering, and then focused my master's thesis, which is then the diploma thesis in Germany, with power electronics, and did some high-frequency power supplies. At that point, I was looking for something in general that you could get self-employed, sort of, because a lot of stuff, when you go into other topics, you're part of a super big company, like, for example, Mercedes and Porsche and Bosch, the typical companies around Stuttgart where most of my friends are working these days. You're just one engineer out of multiple thousand, and you never really see what is before your little part you're developing, designing, or testing, and you never really know what the next step of that little part is. So you don't really have that holistic view what is happening to where you spend your time and your ideas and your sweat getting something working and make it reliable. But in power electronics, and specifically then at that point, the solar industry was coming up. You had a product that is complicated, but you can see the application from an installer putting it in the field all the way into making that solar inverter at that point work with the grid connection. So you know exactly DC in, AC out. How do we make it most efficient, flexible in the design? That was 2010 at that point. I got an internship actually with a local inverter company that was not too far away in Baden-Württemberg, Refusol. And I spent a few years while I was doing my master's thesis with those guys, and when I finished my diploma and my master's, I actually got hired because I knew all the people, I knew the product, and I just continued with that development. At that point, I was responsible, or I was starting with the group that did the Japanese three-phase inverter, and then when I became a full-time employee, I managed and took care of the team for that Japanese product.
So is that when you got into solar? Is that your your first experience with solar was with Refusol?
Not exactly. It was actually one step earlier, and that was when my dad was looking into getting a solar system installed on our house. Being an electrical engineering student and being very hands-on, we had two companies come in and look at our roof, do the measurements, and give us a proposal. And the proposal my dad was sending me, or both proposals, were not really what I expected and was not really to my liking.
That's not really surprising, Alex, knowing you.
And I just started doing my own research and getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole on looking up which inverter brands there are at that time, which panels were available, how do you do the string design, what racking components, racking manufacture, what makes sense for the tile roofs we have in Europe predominantly. And at one point, once you go through all the steps from the grid application, the inverter selection, how you best connect it with the feed-in tariff program we had at that time, at one point you'd pretty much know exactly all the steps that the installer would have done for you. And since my dad is a very hands-on person, I am a very handy person, we looked at each other, did a little bit of analysis where we can get the equipment from, and we looked at each other and said, okay, you know what, we can probably do it ourselves. And that's what we end up doing. With my brother and a couple of my friends, we installed a 12.96 kilowatt system. The module size was only 240 watts, 60 cell at that point. It's a Yingli system for the panels, and we have an SMA 15 kilowatt inverter.
So that's interesting that you mentioned that, because you always preach oversizing. But in your own first system, you undersized your systems.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And what was the thought process there?
The thought process behind that was actually relatively simple. So Germany, for example, doesn't really have any capacity restrictions where it gets difficult to apply for more AC capacity. So up to 30 kilowatt AC, you can do pretty much whatever you like. So selecting a 12 kilowatt or a 10 kilowatt inverter or a 15 kilowatt inverter would not make any difference from an application perspective because no one really cares. Mm-hmm. At that point, SMA had a 10 kilowatt unit, and then they had a gap in the market, and then they had a 15, 17, and 20 kilowatt unit. The funny part was that the 10 kilowatt was almost as the same price as the 15 kilowatt unit. And I was already thinking about, at that point, 2011 was that, what could we do probably with our garage roof, which we still had without any solar, and we still had a north side. So I was thinking about, maybe I buy the bigger unit. I think it was 180 euros more expensive, so not
negligible,
negligible in the big picture of the whole cost of the system at that time. And the bigger unit was also had a little bit better operation range from the DC side, and I also had some other ideas when it comes to high penetration, so looking 10, 15, 20 years in the future, when everyone in your street has solar, you can do a lot of things with power factor and stuff like that to affect the voltage and make your system more stable. Not that this is the official message, but these are things that you can do if you have a little bit more inverter capacity available, specifically in the German market. And at that point, I said, you know what, spend $180, get the bigger unit. It doesn't really hurt. But yes, for most applications in the Canadian market, and with significantly lower inverter cost these days, the spread between some of the manufacturers' power classes is larger. And when you look into electrical panel in the Canadian market for behind-the-meter systems, it matters.
That's a big topic,
it matters if you have a 9 or 9.6 kilowatt inverter that fits on a 50 amp breaker, or if you go to a 11.4 where you may need a bigger electrical panel or you need a splitter box because your busbar rating is affecting you. So at that point, it's not only the cost of the inverter anymore, it's your application, some policy restrictions like in Ontario, the 10 kilowatt limit we have, and secondary costs like electrical panel size, bus bar rating, service upgrade that may be needed. And at that point, the cost is much larger, and oversizing at that point would make a lot more sense.
Yeah. Which kind of brings us back to designing the systems right for each specific
knowing your market, knowing your product, and knowing how you can play with different parameters, and understanding what the outcome will be, or the outcome is, when you have oversizing, no oversizing, smaller, bigger inverter, panel, bus bar ratings, and these kind of things.
So you're working at Refusol, I guess, is where we kind of left off. Prior to going back into your start into solar. But so Refusol, you were in charge of the Japanese market. How do you end up in Canada, of all places?
Interesting story. So the Japanese product is very, very similar to requirements for the North American product at this time. So UL requirements and some of the Japanese jet requirements were matching. So I knew a lot of the US topics and issues from a development perspective, what our US teams were facing, because of the similarity to the Japanese market. And then at that time, Refusol got bought by Advanced Energy, so an inverter manufacturer that is no longer in the market in the US these days. They left the market. But at that time, they were looking for a string inverter three-phase product, because the US market in the 2012, 2013, 2014 timeframe didn't really have a large power, low weight, high efficiency three-phase inverter. Yeah. A lot of stuff was done with three single-phase inverter grouped together in a three-phase configuration. The SMA tower, for example, comes into Sunny Mini Central, the 310 kilowatt units together to a 30 kilowatt, or then very large, very heavy, relatively inefficient 30, 100 kilowatt units that weighed 600 pounds or something like that, and were super expensive. And Refusol at that point had a 38 kilogram, 20 and 24 kilowatt unit, which was a game changer to the industry in North America. And that's why Advanced Energy was interested in the European manufacturer that had that product and had a product ready to be deployed in the North American market. And with that purchase, they were looking for someone who knew the product and was willing to relocate either to the US or the Canadian market. And Advanced Energy had an office in Mississauga. And yeah, I said, I'm the guy, and no one else really wanted to move to the US or to Canada at that point in the engineering department. And yeah, I got hired in Mississauga in 2014 and became the product manager for the US product line in that three-phase string inverter. And that's how I came to Canada.
So why did you choose Mississauga over the US? What were your options in the US? Where could you have gone?
It was Bend, Oregon. Beautiful place. I absolutely love Oregon. Been there multiple times. Two reasons actually made the final decision. First, in 2011, I actually spent some time in Canada, in Collingwood, with a family that my dad knew from his successor in his previous role. So multiple level related, but I ended up in Collingwood, and I absolutely loved the Canadian lifestyle and the work-life balance with Blue Mountain and the water and boating and kayaking.
It's a nice area.
It's a very nice area and a very nice family. Loved the whole thing. So I already had some ties to Ontario at that point. And the other reason is in the US, if you get a work permit that is issued by your employer, it's a work permit tied to that employer. So there's a lot more risk that is put into that basket when you get a work permit only to that specific company. If something goes wrong or whatever happens, then you are immediately being kicked out of the country. And if you make these big steps in your life, that you move to a different country and you're trying to build your life at that point, there's just too much risk. So the Canadian system is a little bit more friendly when it comes to that. Getting a new work permit for a different company is easier, and that's exactly what happened. Actually,
I was gonna take it there. Yeah. So, what happened?
A year and a half later, Advanced Energy decided to leave the solar industry and refocus on their chip industry and power supplies, the other business units, what they're doing there. And with that change, they laid off pretty much the entire team in the solar industry, in the solar business unit, including myself. And that's actually how I got to meet Peter Müller and how I joined Frankensolar a little bit later.
So tell us that story. Tell us how did you meet my dad, Peter, and how did you end up at Frankensolar?
So the solar industry in Canada at that time was pretty much focused in the Ontario market, and the Ontario market it's a very familiar market. It's not super big. You know the people, and of course, being with a manufacturer locally here in Ontario, you know your customers and you know the projects. And Peter was actually one of our customers at AE at that point, with a few projects on the commercial side. We sold him a few 400 kilowatts at that point.
Not megawatts.
A few hundred kilowatts, exactly. And we met at the Kansia show.
Solar Canada, right? Which is now called ETC.
Exactly, correct.
Which will be in Calgary again this year.
I was just walking into the Frankensolar booth and started chatting with Peter. And I don't know how we ended up with the conversation that I'm looking for a job, or I'm generally interested. I never really looked for a job specifically for being with a distributor. It just one came to the other, and we hit it off well, and met a couple of weeks later over lunch and discussed what the ideas are and where Peter sees Frankensolar, and I liked what I heard, and
you did an internship with us first, right?
Funny thing, exactly. Between my visa application going through and everything, and that I spent 2 weeks getting to know the team at that point in Mississauga as well, because Frankensolar initially had the office and the warehouse in Mississauga. Got to know the team. Peter, you were there as well at that time. And I liked what I saw, and I signed my contract.
I still remember Peter was at that Solar Canada show back then. Peter came to me afterwards. He's like, I met this really interesting German guy, and he's an engineer. I'm like, whatever. We hear this all the time. Like, it's. Do we really need that? But anyways,
it was a smaller team at that time.
We were a very small team back then. I think we were like 5-6 people. So
plus the warehouse. Yeah.
Plus the warehouse. So it was pretty small. But so lucky for Frankensolar to have run into you, and the timing just worked out perfect for everyone, right? And I think obviously we're so happy to have you on this team.
Yeah, same from my side. Love what I'm doing, and could not imagine anything else.
Yeah. So so that's kind of how you got into solar. And what does Alex like to do on his personal time? Like, what do you do? Other than the many hours you spend in the office.
I like tinkering with stuff, of course. So as much as I like designing systems for solar or troubleshooting problems of other people, I also like to troubleshoot and look into things, pretty much in the office or at home or with other people. I'm a big car guy.
Really?
I love North American muscle cars. When I was in Ontario here in 2011, in Collingwood, I actually bought a 1976 Corvette Stingray. And I brought it over to Germany after. That's the funny part, a year later. Love the car. I love V8s. I love the sound. It's just something that European sports cars don't have. They have a different style, and I like those cars too in the sound. But North American muscle is just its own category. I also have a classic VW bus transporter in Germany still. That was my first car I bought, and I still have it. It's parked at my mom's place right now. I cannot sell it because I'm emotionally attached to that one. So yeah, big car guy. At the moment, I'm lacking a little bit of garage space here in Ontario.
Yeah, we should,
to continue
the
that
home
path.
prices here are really great these days, so
Yeah.
maybe a bit more difficult, right?
Exactly.
For you and your wife to, at the moment, it's
Exactly,
crazy.
but it'll come in, and we will definitely add a classic to it as well. Besides that, we spoke about that a few years ago. Very early on, when I was 14, I started an event service, audiovisual AV company. So we did very early on parties at the high school, and we did some bands, and that developed into not really a hobby anymore. It actually developed into a company. I was doing
At 14?
At 14, yeah.
Yeah, so you had your first company at 14.
I had my first company. I didn't even have, of course, no driver's license. So I had friends that are a little bit older. I hired guys that drove the trucks and my bus and all the transport and all the stuff we had. So all the equipment at that time, it was all in the analog ages. So things were large and heavy. Nowadays, everything is digital and super convenient to take around. We built up equipment and did lots of concerts and stuff. And that developed more in a commercial thing. So I've done many business events where they have speakers out of the ministers or some CEOs that speak in front of a crowd and do all the discussion, meeting stuff. We do a lot of architectural lighting. So of course, Europe with many castles and events being typically or taking place at those castles. We did some architectural lighting for those customers in a larger scale. I did that many years. Over 1,000 events. I probably have been on 400 or 500 weddings.
Oh, wow.
and did the audio stuff and the lighting stuff for those guys. And that business I sold a couple of years before I graduated, just because you have to refocus and it was just too much. But yeah, good times. And
the business still around? Do you know? Do you follow it?
A couple of the people I worked in the past, they took over that. Of course, they developed themselves as well, and they moved the business to a different city. But it's the same core group that is still doing stuff, and it's always good. Even at the university, we had a group that was doing some AV stuff, and it's always good to get some emails once in a while as a follow-up. What is happening, what new stuff they buy, and what events they are participating, and was a very cool time. Yeah.
Which actually financed your whole time in school, right?
Exactly. That made it possible to have a car while going to university and had a little bit of cash to do certain things at that time. Yeah.
Which one of my favorite stories that you always tell is your ice making business, and maybe you can tell us, tell the followers.
A pretty crazy thing. Within that event service, being exposed to all these university parties later, I saw that the party organizers had issues getting ice cubes for the cocktails. Compared to North America, it's not as easy in Germany to just go and get a few hundred kilograms of ice for a party with a few thousand people. So the organizer was struggling to get 500, 600, 700, 800 kilograms of ice at once, including whatever ice cubes and crushed ice. So my company was already there helping those or being contracted for all the AV stuff. And I said, you know what, I can provide ice cubes for them too. And the margins on ice cubes and frozen water is just insane compared to doing audiovisual stuff. And then I was just researching a little bit on eBay at that point, and I found a commercial ice maker. And I didn't really plan to buy that thing. And I didn't really plan to get into that ice business, but I had that on the radar. And at one point, I was using these auto sniper tools at a time where you can bid at the last second in the early days of eBay. And I just put a few items, because I was very active on eBay at that time, put a few items with some prices on that sniper. And at one point, I was sitting at my computer and I got a pop-up message. Successful bid. And I said, what did I buy? Because it wasn't even on my mind anymore. And indeed, I was successful with an ice machine, and that machine was one of the larger machines that I was looking at. It had a capacity of 240 kilograms in a 24-hour time frame. And yeah, that machine was bigger than I expected when I actually drove there and picked up the machine. And at that point, yeah, now I had the machine. What am I doing with it? Because you're not just using it for your own ice cubes if you have a few friends over. And then one came to the other, and I said, okay, the capacity is there. Let's offer that capacity to my own university group first. And then it was just word of mouth, and multiple other universities and other parties started contacting me because I also provided the boxes and the cooling equipment and little spoons to serve the ice, and industrial ice crushers that you get fresh crushed ice, which was much higher quality than crushed ice out of a bag, because I did it locally. And I had that full service, including delivery, and people loved that stuff. And yeah, margin was very good, and I did that for a few years. And another thing that really came a little bit later, when you're studying electrical engineering and you go through your books and the math for multiple hours a day. With my friends, we typically met at university, and then you go home. Going home, you want to do something that you don't really have to think a lot. So you don't want to do something totally crazy. And taking care of the ice machine, you have that electromechanical part, back to the tinkering aspect, but packaging the ice and everything, it's just something that gives a little bit of balance to that brain focus that you have all day. And you have something that brings you down, relaxes a little bit, and yeah.
All I can think of every time you tell that story is I can think of Walter White from Breaking Bad, and I'm kind of picturing you that way. No mafia that you had to deal with, or it was pretty good that way, right? So,
yeah.
But and fully legal, of course.
Yeah, I had a license for the food safety and all the stuff you need to do in Germany. Of course, highly regulated. Had an extra insurance policy and all the stuff that comes after. Yeah, lots of cold storage. I rented a cold storage place, had I think 12 different large-scale freezers that are also rented out to parties if they want to have storage locally behind the bars and all kinds of things. So it blew up a little bit larger than I initially expected, but I liked what I was doing, sold that business off to someone, and
Very nice. That's such a cool story. I love that story. Yeah, so that's that, and I want to talk a little bit about kind of the solar industry in Canada. What are kind of some of the things in Canada or across the globe, some of the developments that you're seeing, and some of the challenges maybe, and like?
I think the biggest positive message we're seeing globally as well as here in the Canadian market, solar is getting more mature, and things get easier because it's more mainstream. That is in the sales process, but specifically when it comes to utility companies, inspection of systems, available technology, trained technicians and installers. Every level and every segment of that industry is getting more professional because more experience is there, and things just get easier. We now see a trend from the initial solar-focused part, so grid-tied solar, that grid-tied battery storage systems are coming. A lot of people are looking into backup systems for residential. We see lots of demand on the commercial scale. And battery storage today is probably what grid-tied solar was 10, 12, maybe 15 years ago. So it's relatively new. Utility companies don't really know how to handle it. It's not exactly sure what the value proposition is. Yes, we have early test systems, but it's not a massive established industry.
Yeah, it's not very mature yet, for sure.
Exactly. So the products are mature, and we already have equipment, but it's not as easy as installing a hot tub, for example, or a CNC machine for a company or something. Because it's still new to the engineers, still new to the utility companies. It's not really defined what you can do in some scenarios.
Even the certification.
Policy perspective, certification is
agencies
sort of up to speed, but sort of not fully understood by every stakeholder in the industry. But looking forward, we have very, very good steps that we already see that are implemented or in the pipeline. We mentioned we have a binational code for battery storage, which makes things easier because we're not only talking about Canadian-focused certification and US-focused certification that are sort of the same but are not the same. Now we have really a certification standard and documentation that is the same for both countries, the US and Canada. And specifically for us in the Canadian market, we benefit of a harmonized standard because no inverter manufacturer or system manufacturer typically is developing something specifically for the Canadian market. It's always the large US market as the driving force to make decisions to bring a certain product into the market. And then the Canadian market is an afterthought. Oh, we have a product in the US. How could that fit into in the Canadian market as well? And that's something we certainly benefit if the same certifications that company that is bringing something to the US will also work in the Canadian market.
And there's so many new storage companies out there.
It's absolutely crazy, yeah. There's not a single week where I don't get a new email and a new introduction from someone to a new battery storage or inverter company that does something, predominantly China, of course, that is entering that market and wants to find partners. It's very, very difficult to really pick products that check all the boxes because the North American market with the voltage levels we have, the certification requirements, how North American installers are wiring things is very different compared to the rest of the world, Europe, Australia, China, and all these markets. It's just different. And a product that is developed in Europe and then be brought to the US or the Canadian market, or a product that was first developed in China and being brought to the market, does not necessarily fit how a North American installer installs that product and how he or she needs to be compliant with local code. So having a product that is really developed with a North American customer and installer in mind is super important. And that also go through all the documentation to the app, how it's being implemented for the installer to program certain things for the end customer to see what they are getting and how the system is operational. It's just a lot more features that are built into a battery storage system compared to just a grid-tied system that gets power from the roof, is feeding it into the grid, and you may or may not have some self-consumption monitoring, but that's pretty much it for that grid-tied solar. For battery storage, typically you have it combined with solar on your roof. You have all these options from battery backup as the low-hanging fruit where most of the customers are interested in.
It's about a full ecosystem, right?
It's an ecosystem, exactly. Then you add your EV charger, then you want to prioritize the car or the home battery over another. You want to have certain features when it comes to time of use or for some peak shaving, not necessarily here in the Canadian market right now, but we see that in California or other markets in the US, where the value is not necessarily only in your kilowatt hour per se, it's in the kilowatt hour at a certain time.
Yeah, so which we see in Ontario, for example.
It's coming, already, exactly.
Right?
So we see huge
overnight rates,
huge policy changes away from a more static hydro policy towards a dynamic pricing structure, time-based. The next step would be a fully dynamic, that you don't have a hard time slot anymore, that you just buy it on a, let's say, an energy stock exchange, and the power is, or the energy is completely dependent on that specific point in time. So for example, we see that in Europe right now, a huge change in how power is being delivered to the customer. We see still a lot of flat rate services, but all the new players in the industry right now go into a dynamic pricing structure. So if there's a lot of wind and if there's a lot of solar power, the end customer has a huge benefit because the kilowatt hour is super cheap. Versus on the opposite end, of course, if there is no sun at night and there is no wind power in the North Sea, then the power is quite high. And by having that price indication, customers can react and, of course, in the first step, use their load, that they don't turn on the dryer when the power is super high. They can just see, 24 hours in advance, they see between that and that time, probably the power is more expensive. I may start my dryer or my dishwasher 2 hours earlier or maybe 2 hours later. But now you can also bring the battery into the equation and say, okay, I can use the battery to dynamically optimize when I charge the battery from solar or even from the grid at very low energy prices, and then use that stored capacity to have a zero feed-in, so zero consumption at the time when the power is super expensive.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you have totally different use cases beyond just a battery as a backup, that the customer has a good feeling that he's not sitting in the dark if the power goes out.
Which is also really exciting, I think, for us. It makes it interesting in where it's not just installing a solar system at a feed-in tariff or a net metering price per watt, right? Where you make a certain amount of money, and it's more about designing a full system again, right?
Exactly.
And that's where the value proposition comes in.
It makes it also more challenging for the average installer, because selling a grid-tied system is a relatively straightforward thing.
Very cookie cutter.
I would almost say today. You have your simulation tools. It's relatively easy to give the customer a prediction model based on your roof layout and based on the modules and whatever setup we are proposing to you. This is the annual kilowatt hour output for that customer. So it's pretty straightforward. But if you now introduce a battery storage system that does more than just the backup portion, you now have all these different dynamic sources. It depends on the load profile of the customer. It depends on the rate structure of the utility the customer is connected to, and what the customer wants to achieve with the system, how much capacity is being allocated to these additional functions that are layered on top of the base battery function as a backup, and how much do you want to retain on backup. And all these things make it a little bit more challenging for customers, because you can make it super simple and just give ballpark numbers to the customer, or you can have more advanced solar simulation tools that also include now a load profile from the customer, but then you have more interaction with the customer. So you need not only to inquire how big his roof is, you also need to inquire, can we get an hourly load profile, implement a load profile, simulate what can be covered by the solar portion alone, and then estimate based on, let's say, the last 12 months, what could that be if we implement a solar system, implement a battery, different battery sizes. So what would a 10 kilowatt hour system do for the customer? What would a 20 kilowatt hour system do for the customer? And see where's the sweet spot and where's the value proposition that the salesperson is pitching to the end customer. And I think we still have a lot to learn how best to bring that or those features and that value proposition to the customer, and to steer the customer's interaction and the sales process to something that works for the salesperson to not spend too much time, and that because you can really go into the deepest of the analysis and still do efficient sales.
I think, and I mean, with the high uptake of storage in Europe specifically, I think what we have seen is prices drop significantly over the last 3 years or so. We have seen some of that, I think, in North America, but we haven't as much. What do you think that is? And
to your point, I just read 3 days ago in a report, the German market for residential has an adoption rate for storage of 70% in 2023. So it's absolutely crazy. I knew the number was very high.
And the German market is huge, right?
Exactly, it's absolutely huge. Australia also has a very, very high adoption rate for on-site storage. But it's a different mindset, and solar got very cheap in Europe. Solar got also very cheap here in Canada and the US in most jurisdictions. But now we see that vendors and companies that have experience with residential storage in the European and as well as in the Australian market, they did already look into the market earlier, but getting into the market in North America was very, very difficult based on certification requirements, because it was very tough to comply with the fire propagation testing, for example, under UL 9540, then the new system certification requirements, and all these local nuances that are just not really regulated. Now we're at a point where we have a national or a binational code, actually, that things are defined, but it was not that way all the time. What we see right now is that with the growth in the battery manufacturing capacity, predominantly driven by electric vehicles, of course, and of course the growth in grid-tied storage, large scale as well as on a smaller scale, there are multiple companies investing heavily in expanding their manufacturing capabilities. We see the biggest one in the world, of course. We have the Tesla in North America being very popular with their Powerwall. BYD in Europe has very high market share. Pylon-Tech is extremely successful in Europe and Australia with their systems, specifically on smaller commercial and residential. And we have a multitude of other smaller battery companies. But what we're seeing right now is that the market is consolidating. There is no space for 250 different battery manufacturers. And you want to have a battery system that is well supported with a multitude of inverters. If you have that, let's say, agnostic system in Europe, where you have one inverter that can be or is compatible to, let's say, 5 different batteries, and these 5 different batteries are also compatible with 10 different other inverters from different markets. That will not be exactly the case here in North America based on those system certification requirements, but we can see a certain trend as well, that we have pre-certified combinations where certain inverter brands have either their own battery that may or may not be a labeled battery from someone else or their own design, or we have the similar combination that certain inverter manufacturers specifically, they pick battery partners that they work with and are compatible on the communication side, on the system certification, as well as on the labeling. And that makes it easier. And specifically making it easier for the installer to pick a product that is scalable, more cost-effective, and fully certified and documented. In the past, it was more like a pick and choose kind of thing. You bought an inverter from whatever brand, and you bought a battery from another brand, and you stitched that together. And you spoke with your inspector, and the inspection was done based on the underlying certification of each of the products. That is no longer the case. So now the Canadian code and the new code coming out in March for the 2024 CEC is really focusing on that system certification. So the manufacturer, either as their own system or the inverter manufacturer plus the battery manufacturer, they have to work together to package that as a system. And having that packaging and the documentation really makes it more predictable how these systems can be installed and can pass inspection. And it also makes it easier to sell because you know exactly these are the compatible options, these are the scalabilities. I can have a 10, 15, 20 kilowatt hour system or even larger, and it paves the way. And then on top of that, when it comes to more product being available, we see significantly higher competition, and that is driving down prices. And that's what we're seeing right now. And a few of those larger Chinese companies are extremely attractive and extremely pushing into the Canadian market.
We're having a big push. I mean, Growatt, for example. it's crazy how competitive
Exactly.
they are versus some other manufacturers. And we're
prices
not
are cut
talking
in half.
and we're not talking about a small company here. We're talking about a very large inverter company that has a storage solution. It's quite exciting. I think there will be really high uptick.
And we will see further price reduction in the whole thing. But as I just said, having prices cut in half is a huge step for installers to look into options they can provide in the sales process to their customers. So it's not only a sale for solar alone as a grid tied. It can also be now, a lot of companies are already doing that. You can open the door with a sale for grid tied solar, but you can offer, we can offer your battery backup system. We can offer your EV charger that is in that ecosystem tied into. Or you can go from the opposite. We see, for example, huge customer requests in areas that currently had ice storms or longer duration power outages, that people really think, okay, I just had a 5-day power outage.
Yeah.
We had a few cases.
Eastern Canada, I think,
the East Coast.
had a fair bit. I mean, even myself, I had Christmas 2022. We had this big blizzard in Ontario, in southern Ontario, with ice storms, and we had all of Christmas Eve night. I think there was like 8 hours. We had no power, and I live in like Orangeville, so it's
not super rural.
Like it's a town of 30,000 people, right? So it's not super rural, but we had power outages, and I think a lot of it in North America, specifically Canada, power lines above ground, right? There's some grid alliance issues that we have in like certain parts of the country. And
you're well aware if you're sitting in the cold and your heating is not working.
It was wild. It was like 12 degrees, 11 degrees in the house, and I sure wish I had a storage system back then, right? So,
and that is something exactly where people realize, okay, maybe I look into maybe a backup generator that's the low-hanging fruit, and then some
which
people
are very popular in North America.
Of course,
like Generac is a perfect example.
All these brands are piggybacking on that fear being stuck without power and nothing is working. And battery storage with price reductions will go into that market, are already addressing that market, because it's just easy to have a very smooth transition. There's no generator that need maintenance. And it
no noise.
It's typically
completely
silent,
quiet, right?
Exactly. And for most of the systems actually have a transfer switch where you can add a generator. So for long duration backup, when, for example, in the winter the solar system is not capable of recharging your battery, that you can live over the next night, for example, you can still attach a small or bigger generator to make that system as a hybrid, so battery and generator hybrid, for people who really want to have that peace of mind. I always call it the backup to the backup system. But all these systems are possible, and all these combinations. It's really it comes down to available product, simplification of the process, clear instructions, a clear electrical code, and just more experience for vendors, installers, inspectors, and then the customer as well. To make that more successful.
Awesome. So I think we're going to wrap up here. How can people get in touch with you, Alex?
I think the easiest would be on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, very easy to find, Alexander Wolf. A lot of people already have my email and my telephone number. I'm talking to a lot of our customers and people in the industry from coast to coast to coast. I love doing that and hearing what challenges people are facing all over the country and how we can address that. But yeah, always happy to have a chat and feel free to reach out to everyone.
Perfect. Yeah, as for myself, of course, as well, reach out to me via LinkedIn. You can send emails to us at sales@frankensolar.ca if there's something we can help you out with. And yeah, so that kind of concludes that first podcast here. There will be many more to come. Alex and myself will be talking to all kinds of industry experts. So looking forward to that. Until then.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.